So I see a lot of intelligent people talking about metaphor and asking questions about metaphor, and it's a very important question. I think it's going on more and more often. And the tradition is that metaphor was just something poets did, like a flourish, a superficial thing, and the strength and power of them is akin to like a political ad. It wasn't a good thing, it's just a powerful illusion. And they tried to just avoid that and take out the metaphor and make everything literal. And I think cognitive science, a certain school of thought in cognitive science, is basically discovered. And I don't push authors a lot or particular, books. But sometimes, Albert Einstein comes up with the theory, there's the source, and there's a big group of people doing it. But you should read the books of George Lakoff of UC Berkeley. Lakoff. Okay, and he demonstrates it. Now, he's not the most exciting prose writer, but he is exhaustive, and there's a lot of studies reported from all in cognitive science. You have a collaboration among people studying neurology, psychology, philosophy, linguistics. Of course, he's linguistic. He goes over anthropology, all kinds of examples of language and various concepts, and the end result is just something to to say. You don't have to agree with all of his theory, but there's a core there that just makes sense. Basically, the human mind can only comprehend things that it interacts with as a human body, right? The mind evolved to operate the body, to move it, sense and motor. That passes for the literal level. Now, there's arguments to be said about how that's not even literal, and I could go into that, but it probably just confused this particular point. The body is the literal level. I'm holding a pen. Okay, now anything when you go out of that scale, if you go up into the bigger scale of the universe, or down into the little scale of the tiniest things you can imagine, the only way to think about those things is to relate them back to metaphors to the human body, and thus, string theory, you got little springs or strings, you have electrons were thought of as little BBs. Waves, we use waves, and because there's wave type mathematics, but it's very unlike the wave that we interact with in the ocean and the water when our interactive experience with certain kinds of waves, certain kinds of oscillatory phenomena, right? You always have to bring it back to that. And even things that in a way are within this scope of the body start to be mapped that way. Like the fact that the future is in front of us. It's not literally in front of us. This pen is literally in front of me, according to this body level of literalism, but saying that the future is in front of me. And, Lakoff has an example of a culture. It's rare. Most cultures do think of the future as in front of them, but there's one that thinks of it as behind them. Why? Because they can't see it, and they're looking at what has happened. Right? So, the value of metaphor and why metaphors feel like they convey meaning is because they're pipes or circuits of meaning. You're mapping from one domain to another, and then the meaning, once you've made that connection, can flow back and forth. Now, the bad rap of metaphor is, of course, it's like designing a circuit. A well-designed metaphor versus a poorly designed metaphor is like a well-designed circuit versus a poorly designed circuit. Okay, the poorly designed circuit can electrocute its owner, and of course you have a intentionally designed circuit that might be able to electrocute other people, and the power of metaphor is never going to go away because it's like that. Our options are to insulate ourselves, and as a little side note, what I will say, it's often my advice online that having to deal with trolls is an opportunity to learn how to insulate yourself. It's like constantly getting a testing pattern that you can learn that you can use to insulate yourself. You can make it be a vaccination. But anyway, outside of those scales, we are always pulling metaphors to pull it back in. And when you get down to wondering if the body, I'll finish up with this, if even the body level is literal. Well, no, because I literally have this pen in front of me, but no, I literally have patches of color hitting my retina, and I'm image processing them. And I'll lose track of that literalness, goes off into the reductive scale, right? So inductively, I can see that the ultimate literalness is off infinitely after deducing this from all of the things that patches of light into the photons that cause it, into the whole historic paths of the photons that allow there to be a light source. All of that goes back off into a scale that is not literal. So that nothing is really literal, but because we have this brain and the pattern recognition, you know, our locus, our center of origin, what we use as literal are the patterns that our brain connects, but we can't decompose them, and our brain is advanced enough to make sub-patterns, and those patterns can contradict and influence, and you can work on the patterns that you have. And ultimately, you're always bringing things down to the body level. And a big confusion in our history of Western thought, in my opinion, is that we have these abstractions like cause and effect and 2 plus 2, and we don't think we can bring those down to the body. 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can't bring that down to the body. It's just ethereal. It's just on its own. It has nothing to do with the body, except for you don't think millions of years of I've got 2 apples, you've got 2 apples, together we have 4 apples. We have 1 each and then 2 to share with our partners. You know, you don't think there's an experience of 2 plus 2 equals 4, because I do. Okay, cheers.